ever felt stuck in life? Like no matter how much you think about it, you just can't figure out what to do next? Sometimes all it takes to break through the noise is one good question. Sounds way too simple, I know, but stick with me here. One question. I'd love for you to give it a try. Here's what usually happens. If we're feeling stuck in life, it's not usually because we lack options, right? There are all kinds of options out there for where we could go, what direction we could go, what we could do. Sometimes so many that it can be overwhelming. And that's the problem. Our minds can get overwhelmed with all the choices or by all the noise that's around us or by everything that we have to do in our lives and how perhaps sometimes frightening or uncertain our futures can look. So when we're in this situation where we feel like something needs to change, we're not sure what, we end up chasing the symptoms, we're trying to make ourselves feel better instead of getting to the root of the issue. That's where the power of one well-aimed question comes in. Sometimes just one question is all it takes to help us get past all the doubt and the noise and the overwhelm and the stress and dive deeper into ourselves where the real answers lie. There's actually research that backs this up. In psychology, there's this whole process called motivational interviewing. It was designed to help people who feel stuck, people who wanted to change but couldn't seem to figure out exactly how to go about it. So instead of giving them advice about what they should do, psychologists would choose very specific, open-ended questions to ask. Something like, what would your life look like if you made this change you're thinking about? Or what matters most to you right now? And these kind of questions can work. Study after study has shown that when people are guided to answer these questions, especially if they're answering them out loud, which takes a different type of mental process, they start to shift. They start to move from circling around questions or just feeling in an endless spiral of doubt into actually naming their reasons for change and getting clear on what the change needs to be and why, and what next step they should take. And that's where momentum begins. That's when you move out of this stuck place and into moving again, which feels so much better. Researchers have seen this sort of process help with everything from health decisions to overcoming addiction to just finding direction in everyday life, which is what we talk about here on the Next Story Project. So that's what led me to this idea of one revealing question. If entire fields of psychology can use the right questions to help unlock people from these stuck places, why wouldn't the same thing work for you and I? I think it would. And I know it does because I've used it on myself. So this is why I want to give you just one question today. Just simplify it, give you one question to ask yourself. This question is designed to cut through all the noise in your head and pull the truth up where you can see it more clearly. So you might be asking yourself, well, how did you choose this question? I mean, out of all the things we could ask ourselves, why this one? And here's what I've found is that a lot of questions that we're told to ask ourselves or that we hear that we should ask ourselves just kind of add to the noise. I mean, they just make us even more confused. I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes when I've been in a time of life transition and I'm searching for answers and I see other people suggesting that you ask yourself this question or that, and I've done that, but it hasn't really helped. I end up spending time, sitting down and journaling my answer to these questions, and I still feel just as stuck as before. I wanted a question that would do the opposite. I wanted a question that would help you get clear and actually feel like you're moving just a little bit from this stuck place, that you could maybe even see a path forward. And I also wanted this question to be simple enough that you could remember it to ask yourself when your mind is feeling crowded. Because oftentimes when we're in these times in our lives, our mind's kind of going 100 miles an hour. So we can't have some complex question that we're not going to be able to remember. We need something simple, but that's sharp enough to pull the truth out of us so that we can then deal with it more directly. I mean, let me give you some examples of some of the questions that I've heard that you should ask yourself that just haven't worked at all. And maybe you've seen these too. Sometimes they sound inspiring on the surface, but when you're caught in a place where you're not sure what to do next and it's kind of stressing you out, they can just make things worse. So here's one of those that I've been told to ask that just left me totally stumped. And the question is, well, what do you really want? I spoke about this in another video. I don't know. Oftentimes we're in this place where we sense that something needs to change. We're not really sure. I mean, if we knew exactly, then we could just move forward and be fine. But this question can kind of lead to feeling stumped. Now, for some people, maybe it works, but I have found that it can be really confusing. It seems direct and aspirational, and I know that many coaches use this, but to me, this is just too broad. I mean, you might have dozens of conflicting desires going on, or be blocked from even knowing what you want next. That might be part of the problem that you're facing. So I found that this question seems to kind of loop us back into anxiety or confusion, and sometimes to make us feel even worse than we did before. Here's another question that I've heard that you should ask if you're trying to get out of a stuck place. And that is, well, what's holding you back? Again, this can be a difficult one to answer. It seems like it should uncover obstacles in our life, right? If we could get rid of what's holding ourselves back, then we would know what to do next. But that's not always the case. In fact, it's not often the case. There might be so many answers that rise up in response to that question. What's holding you back? Well, fear, lack of confidence, money, time. I mean, we're in these busy lives. And so there's all these things going on. Considering a change, especially when we may not know what that change needs to be, well, everything seems to be holding us back. So listing these things that are holding us back doesn't really help. Everything could be holding us back. There could be all these things. So listing them out and then looking at them is kind of like, okay, that can make me feel even more defeated. Like, this is going to be even harder than I thought. I might as well just forget it, brush my concerns under the rug. This question tends to scatter our focus rather than helping us zero in. Okay, so here's a third one that can be helpful, but I think it can also end up sending us down paths that we're not meant to go on. Let me explain. So the question is this: if you weren't afraid, what would you do? So the point is that this is supposed to engage the imagination and bypass fear. And on one hand, that's really helpful because oftentimes when we're thinking about making some change, or we feel restless, or we feel like some change needs to happen, fear is usually in there somewhere. We're afraid of upsetting the apple cart of our lives. We're afraid of maybe disappointing some other people in our lives if we make this change. We're afraid that we may not be up to being able to make this change happen the way we would like it to. There's so many ways that fear can be involved. So in that way, this can be helpful. If you weren't afraid, what would you do? But for many stuck people, fear is so embedded in this whole experience that it feels kind of abstract or impossible. It's like there's no way we can kind of extract it out of this experience. We can't even imagine there not being fear. So if we can't imagine it, then it's kind of impossible to be able to land on an answer to this question that's going to be helpful. It becomes kind of dreamy instead of useful. I mean, sure, if I wasn't afraid, then I would just go do blah, 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 which can perhaps give us some clarity, but it can still leave us stuck because we're like, I am afraid, and there's fear involved in all these things. I mean, for example, say you're thinking about changing your occupation. The job you're in no longer challenges you. You feel pulled towards something else. Okay, so if you weren't afraid, what would you do? Okay, I'd probably just leave my job and go do this other thing. But that doesn't help because we can't leave our job and do this other thing, we don't think, because we're afraid. If we don't have that regular paycheck coming in, then what are we going to do? Maybe we have families depending on us. Maybe we have other people that are depending on us. We don't know where we would get our next paycheck. I mean, all these fears come up, and just imagining that those fears are going to be gone doesn't magically help us take our next step, if that makes sense. So these are good coaching questions in many contexts. Sometimes they can help. But when you're stuck in life, when you're considering making a change, or when your life is giving you signals that something needs to change, these questions usually don't help. They often lead to just more swirling questions, or making you feel even more stuck, or sensing that there's no way you're ever going to be able to break out. I went looking for something different, a question that would not scatter your focus or leave you feeling even more stuck. And that's what makes this one work where others won't. Okay, so I won't make you wait any longer. Here's the question I landed on. I think this one slices through all of the circling and helps you at least start to sense that you might be able to get unstuck. Here's the question: what am I pretending not to know? Okay, just sit with that for a second. Just a simple question, but don't let that fool you. This one works in a way those other questions don't, because it doesn't ask you to dream up some perfect future, or list every obstacle in your way, or somehow imagine that fear is magically gone. It goes straight to the truth that you've been dodging. And in my experience and research, every time we're going through some sort of a shift in life, there is something that we're dodging. We're not wanting to admit things to ourselves. So let's go back to that example. You're in a job that no longer challenges you. You really feel this pull to do something else. What are you pretending not to know? Probably that this job is not going to get any better. Probably that things are only going to get worse, or, at best, stay the same. You're going to continue feeling unfulfilled for the rest of the time that you stay in this job. So if you choose safety, and you choose that regular paycheck, and you choose not to face the fear that you may have about making a change, that's going to stay the same. And you're going to feel gradually worse about it. Because I can tell you this one thing: if you feel really dissatisfied about where you are right now, that's not magically going to get better. I mean, if you can imagine still being in this place where you are right now, and that could be in a job, it could be in a relationship, could be in a location, could be in a business, it could be anything like that. If you imagine that 5 years from now you're still there and you go like that, that's how you feel, that's not going to change. That's only going to get worse. There isn't going to be some magical solution that's just going to pop out of the blue and rescue you from this situation. So what am I pretending not to know? I'm pretending that somehow this is going to get better. I'm pretending not to know that this isn't going to change. Okay, that's one example. This question goes straight to the truth that we all dodge when we're struggling. And after that, we can't stay stuck in the same way. I mean, I can remember a relationship that I was in for way too long. If I would have asked myself this question, what am I pretending not to know? It would have been that this is never going to work. No matter how hard I try, no matter how much I try to change myself, no matter how hard I try to shift how I am as a person or how I show up in life, this isn't going to get any better. That's what I was pretending not to know. I kept thinking I could fix it. I kept thinking things would change. I kept thinking just one more conversation, we're going to turn this around. I was pretending not to know that this was impossible and it wasn't going to work. Once you realize what you're pretending not to know, you can't look at the thing the same way anymore. The problem becomes crystal clear, which forces a certain type of movement. Now you may be wondering, okay, why this question? Let me show you, because once you see how it works, you're going to understand why this is a question you need when you're stuck. So here's the first reason this question works. It cuts through your own avoidance. When you ask yourself, what am I pretending not to know? It forces you to acknowledge what you've been sidestepping, perhaps for a long time. Let's say that you're in a business partnership and it hasn't been going well and your business is starting to go downhill and you can see it. And you've had many discussions and you've tried different things and you've put in new systems and it's not changing things. What are you pretending not to know? That this business partnership is over, that it's time to take the business a new direction. Naming that truth is your first step to change, because as long as we don't acknowledge the truth, then we can still pretend like we can somehow fix this situation that we're in by staying in it, which often is not the solution. I'm not saying always, but I am saying most always you have to change it somehow. Second, this question works even when your mind is foggy. And this is important because when we are facing a life change, we often aren't thinking clearly. We're stressed. We're pulled in different directions. We feel maybe compelled to do something else, but we're pulled by the lives that we've created and everything that's in them to stay right where we are. So the mind is not thinking as clearly as it might if we were out of that situation. I mean, I can look in hindsight at some of the situations in my life where I had to make a change, and I can look back now and say, oh yeah, I can see that very clearly. If we could pull out of our situation, we can see it clearly, but when we're in it, it's very confusing most of the time. So our mind is not thinking clearly, but this question can still work in that point. It's not asking us to imagine some perfect future where we're not afraid, or it's not asking us to name every obstacle that's in the way right now, because oftentimes we can't even sense what every obstacle is. A lot of questions like that assume that you're clear-headed enough to imagine your ideal life or to map out these obstacles, but that's not usually where we are when we're stuck. We typically can't see that far ahead. All we can see is what's right in front of us and how it's not right. This question doesn't ask you to dream or to strategize. All it asks you to do is to notice what's already true. Even in the fog, the answer to this question rises pretty quickly. And finally, what I like about this question is that it's easy to remember. What am I pretending not to know? Long, complicated prompts are great if you're going through a workshop or you're working with a coach one-on-one regularly. But in the midst of a restless night or a stressful morning commute, when everything that's wrong about your life comes flooding at you and your stress levels go up, those kind of questions vanish from your brain. This one is short and it's sharp and it cuts right to the heart. And the answer often comes faster than you might expect. And finally, what this question does is it reframes whatever you might be feeling as data instead of a failure. This is so important because so many times when we're in a time of life transition, we can feel like we've failed. I failed in this business. I failed with this partnership. I failed in this relationship. I'm not doing well at the job. We tend to blame ourselves when we can sense that something needs to change. And oftentimes we then blame ourselves also for not being able to get ourselves out of this stuck position. We're stuck. We're like, why can't I just make a decision and do it? Why do I keep sitting here in this in-between place? But when we ask ourselves what we're pretending not to know, then our own resistance kind of becomes a clue. Maybe you're pretending not to know that you're burned out with whatever you're doing right now, or that you're afraid of disappointing someone. And that isn't a failure. When you realize that, you're like, that's not a failure. That's a signal. That's data that you can use. And once you see it that way, you can decide what to do about it instead of feeling paralyzed by it, which is kind of huge. If you can say, all right, what am I pretending not to know? That this business partnership is no longer working. Bang, there's the data right there. So then you can shift and say, okay, what do I need to do to make it so that this business does survive or close it down or whatever your decision ends up being? It takes you into a different place. What am I pretending not to know about this relationship? That it's been draining me for years. All right, so something needs to be done about that. I can no longer pretend that this is all okay. Does that make sense? This is why this question works when so many others don't, particularly for when you're stuck in life. So let's talk about 2 simple ways you can work with this question in the coming week. One of the best ways is just to write it down in your journal. So you just write on the top of your journal page, what am I pretending not to know? And then you just start answering with whatever comes to mind. Don't edit, don't judge it, don't worry about making sense. Just give yourself like 5-10 minutes and see what shows up on the page. So if journaling isn't your thing, there is one other way you can try this. Pick a situation this week where you feel stuck. Maybe you're trying to make a decision and you're not sure which way to go, or you're trying to change your routine, or you have a relationship that needs to shift somehow. Ask the question to yourself, what am I pretending not to know? And then just notice your very first gut response and treat that like a clue. So here's what I'm hoping you'll take away today. You don't need to have every answer right now for what needs to happen in your future. Sometimes all it takes is one honest question to break the cycle of being stuck and help you see the next small move. If you're ready to keep working with this, I've put together a free guide that might help you. It's called the Signals Journal, the 7 signs that your life is asking for a change. You'll find inside simple prompts to help you figure out what these signals might mean for you. You can grab it at the link below, completely free. I'd also love to hear from you. If you try this question and you're willing to share what you found out, please add that in the comments, because you never know who else may need to hear that insight too. Thanks for being here. You know that your life is plotting something, so you might as well start eavesdropping. I'll see you next time.